Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ticked Off, a series where we explore everything from chronic illness and healing to pet care, outdoor adventure, and wellness tips for living your best life. I'm Olivia Abrams, the founder of TiCK MiTT, and your host for this series. Whether we're chatting with veterinarians, wellness experts, or passionate outdoor enthusiasts, our goal is to give you actionable insights and real stories that inspire and empower you. So let's dive in and meet today's guest. Dr. Rawls is a licensed physician with over 30 years of experience in chronic Lyme disease, holistic health, and herbal medicine. After a personal health crisis in his early 40s, he turned to alternative therapies and ultimately restored his health with phytotherapy. He is the author of several books, including Unlocking Lyme and the Cellular Wellness Solution, and serves as the medical director and co-founder of Vital Plan, which I am a user of, a holistic health company. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Rawls.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You are really a titan in the Lyme disease industry, and I'm so lucky to have you on this show. Would love to start off with your three phases of healing. Can you walk us a little bit through what that is and how you created that?
Sure. Yeah. This is a new program that we've introduced after years of helping people with herbal therapy and providing support, providing as much education because it's not ever just the herbs or just the nutrients. It's always that support that comes with it. So this is the new evolution of that. And here we're talking about chronic Lyme disease, not acute Lyme disease. People that have been bitten by tick or picked up microbes in other places too, because we're basically microbe sponges. We have
Mhm.
things that stay with us for our whole life. And they can be in our body, not make us sick until the right factors come along, and then they start to become active in our body again. And that's basically what's happening with chronic Lyme. So, most people with chronic Lyme, the vast majority of people, the microbes have been in their system often long before they became ill because these things are very, very stealthy. When you become ill, it's not just a microbe that's invaded your body making you sick. I don't really use the word infection anymore to apply to chronic Lyme disease. So, an infection is when a microbe, a bacteria, a virus, a protozoa, a fungus first enters your body. Never been there before. New thing that's entered your system, activated your immune system. That's what acute Lyme disease is. But what I've realized is a lot of people get bitten by ticks, they pick up microbes, they don't get sick because these things are very stealthy. They go in our system, they embed in our tissues, deep in our cells, and they stay there. And they just wait for an opportunity. And that opportunity comes along when we have other health issues, chronic mental stress and not sleeping, not following a good diet, being sedentary, exposure to toxic substances like mold and things like that. And it snowballs. And then these microbes start become active and they start breaking down our tissues. And that's what chronic Lyme is. So I realized when it's a complex problem that didn't just happen suddenly, and you've got to unravel it almost in the way that it ramped up. So when you think about it, you've got all these microbes that are active throughout your body, your brain, your tissues, your joints, your muscles, your heart, and they're attacking cells, and all those cells are sending distress signals to the brain. And the brain is bombarded with distress signals, and that causes it to go into alert mode. So you have this exaggerated fight or flight response, and that disrupts hormones. It inhibits sleep. It wrecks your gut because it stops motility. That's a big, big part of this thing. So I realized before you move forward, you have to solve that problem. And a lot of time before you can really get strong antimicrobial herbs in and that sort of thing, you have to calm that down. And once you get that calm, you can work on detox, you can work on gut, and that's kind of the phase two. And then phase three is really doubling down on the microbes and restoring health at the cellular level, restoring the healing capacity of the body. That's where I am. And looking at the whole thing and how we've worked with people in the past, takes about 6 months to go through that whole thing.
So your first phase is, dealing with fight or flight mode and your brain.
Right.
The second one would be looking at the gut, your immune system, and then the third would be actually taking down the microbes that are in your body,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we're working on the mic. We introduce herbals that are a little more gentle and easy to tolerate right up in the beginning because we want to do that. And also herbs to normalize that fight or flight response and balance the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, that stress axis in our body. We're doing the herbs right up front, but we're just not doing heavy hitters. We
Right.
found that if we calm things down first, a lot of people think, always ask, what do I do first? Is it detox? Do I need to do a detox protocol before I do the herbs? And really, it's you have to calm that sympathetic overactivity because
Mhm.
that's disrupting everything in the body. So you're not detoxing. That's disrupting the gut. That's keeping you from sleep. So that's step one, phase one. Once you do that, then you can really work on the gut and the body becomes receptive to detox. By the time you get to that third phase, people are ready to really embrace the full benefit of the full herbal spectrum.
And so this new program, which is called Restore 180, how long did it take you to really understand these three phases and put a program together to combat it in a way that makes sense for our bodies?
This whole thing, understanding all of it, I mean, how we roll everything out now seems so simple and, so obvious. And it just took me 20 years to get there. It's little pieces built on little pieces, getting feedback from people, talking to people, accumulating an enormous amount of information to process and decide what works. And there was just the logistics of getting it done. So part of it is about a year ago, we found something called Mighty Networks that we could create a community, a closed community that we could build within. So we created the Vital Plan Network. And that network allows us to build courses and just give selective information. It gives us the ability to curate the information to roll it out as people need it. And we never really had that before.
Yeah.
So that was a piece that we didn't know existed before last year. So we had been doing it through emails and through just sending people articles, and it was not as efficient as we would like. So we've been working for a year to build all that into this network. So within the network, we can do regular live sessions that people can do group sessions, Q&A, ask me questions directly, work with health coaches directly, talk to one another because that community support is so remarkable. But with this software platform, I'm able to build in multi levels of information of education. So there
Yeah.
are short videos, there are longer, what we call mini courses, like taking a deep dive into stress or sleep, or what do you do about testing and how do you navigate the healthcare system. So we're just building in all this remarkable content for people to use so that they can get all their questions answered in real time. Really, I wanted to very importantly say this isn't a substitute for a provider, it's a complement for a provider. But today, no matter where you go, providers just don't have time to
Yeah.
answer questions in the level that most people want. And they're good for a lot of things. If you're really sick, they have things that can help you acutely. But those day-to-day questions that come up, it's often not enough of a resource that people need. So we want to be that resource. We want to help people use their healthcare providers better
Mhm.
because they're more educated and have more resources to empower that person to take charge in their recovery instead of being left as a passive bystander just relying on others to help them forward.
I think speaking to thousands of people who have had Lyme disease and having it myself and you having it, I think the biggest question everyone asks is where do I start and how do I
Right.
navigate this because it is such a difficult disease to understand. And there are very few people who understand it fully, if those people even exist. I mean, we're continuing to learn about it every day. But having a resource where you can have these easier, questions or certain specific ideas that you can learn about and navigate, I think make it a lot more digestible because I mean, dealing with a chronic illness and figuring out how to navigate your healthcare and figuring out how to navigate your treatment on top of having symptoms feels nearly impossible. And so creating that platform is amazing. And what really speaks to me is not only are you, a very highly thought of physician in your field, but you are an incredible businessman who has understood the importance of listening to your customer. And in this case, your customer are the people who are dealing with chronic Lyme and truly need solutions, and you've been able to provide them what they need. And that's
Sure.
incredible.
Well, I don't know about my business expertise. I rely on my daughter and my team at Vital Plan to really make all that work. But at this point in life, after everything that I've done and been through, it's really important for me to get this information out to people so that others benefit from it. And my journey has carried me in a very different pathway, both away from the conventional medical system, but not necessarily in line with the thought of a lot of the Lyme community. And it
Mhm.
really comes from studying the deep science about the nature of these microbes that we're dealing with and why certain solutions like herbs are very well fit to these things where they might not be for other kinds of microbial infections.
In what ways do you see, aside from herbs, maybe that you have differing opinions from others in the Lyme community?
This all comes from really studying the science. And fortunately, we actually do have a lot of good science out there. What I see is a differentiation between an acute infection and a chronic illness associated with a microbe. If we treat an acute infection one way, well, use those same tools to treat this other problem. And the two are just not the same.
Right.
If you have a chronic infection, it's because microbes have found an opportunity to maintain that presence and maintain activity in your system. So just killing the microbes isn't going to solve the problem. So when you look at the Lyme microbe, the Lyme bacteria, Borrelia, other co-infections, Bartonella, Babesia, Anaplasma, Rickettsia. What's really fascinating about so many of these microbes is they're stealthy. They don't win by aggression. So 95% of the chronic Lyme patients I've talked to don't remember getting sick around the time of a tick bite. And so what happens when that tick bites you, if you're healthy and you don't get a big load of microbes. So if you just get a tick bite and some microbes enter your system, the strategy of the microbe is not making you sick. The strategy is to maintain a presence in your body. That's how they win. That's how they succeed. And they have very sophisticated mechanisms of doing that. So primarily, when they enter your bloodstream, they're trying to get past your immune system as quickly as they can for as many of the microbes as can bacteria, protozoa, whatever it happens to be, and often more than one thing. I mean, you think about ticks, and it's true that some ticks don't carry Lyme's disease or Lyme bacteria, some do, but all ticks carry hundreds of bacteria, and we don't
Yeah.
know what all of them do. So the strategy of these things is getting to your tissues because if they can invade your tissues, they can invade cells, and cells give them protection from the immune system, from antibiotics. And if your cells are healthy, they have the option of just slowing their growth or going completely dormant.
Hmm.
And they can stay that way for a very long period of time. So if you can imagine your whole body seeded with microbes after a tick bite, but it's not enough of a load that you even have symptoms. And these things become dormant in your tissues.
Right.
And then you get other tick bites, and the same thing happens. But then you get bitten by a hamster and pick up Bartonella or from a
Uh-huh.
cat. But you get respiratory infections that you get mycoplasma and Epstein-Barr virus, and you have contact with other people and maybe pick up other species of mycoplasma. And this is going on in our whole lives, and these things are getting in our system without us really knowing about it and becoming dormant in our tissues. So that mechanism of persistence of intracellular the presence and slow growth or dormancy has been documented
Mhm.
for Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, Rickettsia, Anaplasmas, but also when you look at diseases like like pandas, which is associated with strep, and nobody has quite figured it out. I found a study looking at the strep that is associated with pandas,
Mhm.
and this study documented that it could invade cells and go dormant for weeks, for months, and then reactivate. So that's what happens is when your body is stressed in some way, and there are a lot of different stress factors, these things can reactivate. And when they reactivate, they start breaking down your tissues. They because basically your body is a food supply
Yeah.
at that point. And that's what chronic illness is. But at that point, you have this reservoir of not just the Lyme bacteria, but a lot of other things in your system, inside your cells, that are constantly reactivating. So if you bombard your system with antibiotics, it kills the active ones, but it doesn't get to the ones in your tissues.
Hmm.
And so Lyme doctors have found, well, we need to keep using antibiotics for months and months and months and months. And that is the answer. You have to keep to long-term suppression. But if you do that with an
Yeah.
antibiotic, you're going to wreck someone's gut and their microflora and cause a lot of toxicity in the body.
Mhm.
That's the magic with herbs. You don't do that. The herbs have antimicrobial properties, but it's selective. It's the defense system of the plant. So you're suppressing pathogens, all those things that are reactivating, but you're not killing your normal flora
Mhm.
or causing toxicity to your cells. So you can take them for 6 months or years. In my case, I took herbs intensely for 5 years. My gut was better the whole
Yeah.
time. I
Oh.
experienced no severe side effects. But I've been taking herbs now for 20 years and I've experienced some of the best health in the past 10 years that I've had in my whole life.
Yeah.
So it really makes a case. But there's one big thing that separates herbs from antibiotics that everybody ought to be paying attention to. And that is microbial or bacterial resistance doesn't occur to herbs like it does with antibiotics. So every time somebody uses an antibiotic, especially for months on end, they're generating antibiotic resistant pathogens inside their body and they're contributing to the world's supply of antibiotic resistant pathogens,
Hmm.
which has become a big problem. We look at
Mhm.
antibiotics, it's, antibiotic resistant pathogens. It's a worldwide problem that kills millions of people every year. So we really need to look toward these other natural solutions. It just is really important.
One thing that I was thinking a lot about when you were speaking was the difference between acute and chronic Lyme. And so, with all of your patients, or maybe some research that you've read, do we have any understanding as to roughly what percent of people get acute versus chronic, or does everyone that have has acute Lyme have the ability for it to become chronic, or how do we know who has what?
Yeah. It's hard to say because these things are so stealthy. If we could go deep into the tissues and cells of everybody that lived in New England, I think we would have find that a high percentage of people were carrying Borrelia and other tick-borne microbes without knowing it.
100%.
I've even come to the appreciation that acute symptomatic Lyme disease isn't all that common. And I
Mhm.
base that on the fact of just talking to thousands and thousands of chronic Lyme sufferers over the years. And 90 to 95% of them do not remember becoming sick around the time of a tick bite. They didn't feel acute Lyme disease.
Right.
They still acquired all those microbes. And a lot of them, they don't even remember a tick bite.
If I had to guess, I probably had more acute symptoms. I don't remember a tick bite either, but I did get very sick very quickly after being in an area with ticks, probably within a few weeks or maybe a month. And I
Mhm.
was put on an antibiotic regimen, and one of my main symptoms was arthritis. And so I ended up doing a few months of physical therapy. And comparatively to people I know with chronic Lyme, my symptoms are, very, very negligible. So
Mhm.
that leads me to believe that I had more of an acute case.
And it does happen. And on the antibiotic thing, I do think the CDC recommendations for antibiotics with acute Lyme disease are very appropriate because at that point the bacteria are coursing through the bloodstream and they're more vulnerable. It's chronic that is very different.
Mhm.
So it's really important to distinguish between those two. People do get acute Lyme disease, but I think in that case, those cases, people get a big load of microbes. The tick is on for a long time, or they get multiple tick bites. So there are cases where people do get significant symptomatic illness. The point is that doesn't always happen, and it's pretty common that it doesn't.
Mhm.
So having a tick bite and not having symptoms certainly doesn't mean that you haven't acquired this bacteria or a lot of other things along with it.
I know that you have, treated thousands of patients. Do you find that when they are finally, after, potentially many years not having a diagnosis, after they're told you have Lyme disease or you have Bartonella or you have tick-borne diseases, do you think that plays a big role in their mindset shift into now that I know what's wrong with me, I can get better versus feeling so defeated?
I think that's probably the biggest reason for people to do testing is verification. But I've often said the only real difference between somebody with fibromyalgia and chronic Lyme disease is the person with chronic Lyme found a way to get a positive test. But even our testing isn't perfect.
Yeah.
It's, picking things up in a chronic state. The immune system is not as great. The immune reaction is not as great. The level of the microbes in the bloodstream is not as great. They're in the tissues. So, negative tests for people that are actually carrying the bacteria are common.
Very.
And, but they're also false positive tests.
Mhm.
But here's the deal. I did a search recently on ChatGPT just and asked how many microbes, list all the possible co-infections associated that are associated with chronic Lyme that could cause similar kinds of symptoms. I got over 50 different microbes,
Yeah.
and that was a small list. My actual list is a whole lot bigger. I just wanted to see what the computer had. So it is possible to have all the symptoms of chronic Lyme disease and not be carrying Borrelia
Hmm.
because there's so many other bacteria, known and unknown, that can act like that and cause similar symptoms.
And that's
Um,
why people call Lyme the great imitator.
right. And also it's like Bartonella. That's a big one. Everybody, a lot of people are found to carry Bartonella. I read an article recently that suggested that folks that are testing positive for Bartonella in New England probably aren't getting it from ticks. They're not seeing it in the ticks. They're picking it up from pets and other places. So it's really, so Bartonella is as or more common than Borrelia.
Wow.
And there are a lot of ways you can get it. Every mammal species on Earth carries Bartonella of
Hmm.
some type, even whales and dolphins. So these things are remarkably common, and so our exposure to them is much more common than people realize.
Hmm.
So it is definitely possible to pick them up, not be symptomatic when you pick them up, and then become symptomatic later.
it's really incredible how much we've learned about all of this in such a short period of time. I think people forget that Lyme disease was only discovered 50 years ago, and based on what we know now, we exponentially have so much more to learn. And we're very grateful that you are continuing to help people understand this better. Before we sign off, one thing that we like to ask every guest is what ticks you off? Big, small, rational, irrational, let everyone know.
Probably misinformation more than anything else. And I see it all the way from the ivory towers to everywhere else. And,
Mhm.
this idea of evidence-based medicine, evidence-based things, I think it's really important to continue consider all the evidence. And often I see what people are doing is they're making a conclusion and then they are looking only at the evidence that supports that conclusion and not the broader evidence. And we're all guilty of that. But in my journey, I have tried to hold myself accountable to trying to find all of the evidence, trying not to have biased opinions and look for every bit of evidence and consider all of it because it's all valuable. And that's how we keep from making erroneous decisions and end up spreading information.
That's something we can all do is just be a little bit more accountable before we come to a conclusion of something, for sure.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for being here. I love chatting with you. I
pleasure.
love your whole family. I love your daughter, Brayden, and I love the Vital Plan team. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And don't forget to follow TiCK MiTT for more insights, stories, and tips. Until next time, take care and check yourself.